Hey, what's up guys, it's Rob, and just a quick little message before the video starts. There is a link for the article mentioned in the second story in the description below, as well as the links to the other stories, so you can go read them yourself if you want to. As well, I put a lot of time editing this video, so it'd mean a lot if you guys could like the video for me and leave a comment, just any comment at all. Just please leave a comment. I'll be like, what up back. So I don't think I have anything else to say. So if you enjoy the video, please leave a like and enjoy. Don't be too scared. In October of 2016, a longtime family friend had been harassing my family. So I've known this guy since I was around 5. He works at my dad's friend's car dealership as a person who basically maintenances the exteriors, washes the car, shines them, etc. My parents became fond of him because he looked very sweet, and they felt rather pity for him as he had a horrible hygiene habit. They'd often buy him food, gift him clothes, and things of that sort. Around 2015, this man gets a job right across the street from my mom's job. He saw my mom one morning and they just waved at each other. This man starts calling my mom frequently. Now my mom is extremely nice, too nice. So instead of just not picking up, she talked to him. This guy becomes obsessed with my mom to the point she tells him to stop contacting her. Around May of 2016. All is well. Guy stops contacting mom. Months later, he began to watch my mom. He would park his car in front of my mom's job and watch her. She noticed him, but never saw it as a huge threat, so she never said anything. That's where things escalate. My mom was walking out of work with a coworker one day, normal coworker friendship. My mom catches a ride with her coworker to the mandatory work event, so she wouldn't have to drive home too late, as these events end late at night. Meanwhile, this guy is watching them walk to the car. He suddenly thinks that my mom is having an affair with this guy and decides to follow them. They arrive at the place and my mom stays in the car while her coworker goes inside to check if it's the right location. The stalker walks up to the car, opens the door, slaps my mom, grabs a knife from his car, and slashes the coworker's tires. My mom is in complete shock and immediately calls her coworker to come outside. The coworker decides not to press any charges against him, even though he easily could, as there were cameras outside the location. Now, my mom never mentions none of this to my dad because my dad is really explosive to the point that he will get in trouble over this guy. So everything is okay for a couple of days, until this guy starts calling my mom non-stop and leaving her threatening voicemails. The voicemail said things along the lines of, "If you don't meet up with me at the hotel on Wednesday at 1 p.m., I'm going to tell your husband you're cheating on him." This scares my mom because my dad has a past with domestic violence. So she's scared my dad will believe him and beat her. Wednesday comes along and when she gets to work, he's outside watching her, whole day watching her. She calls my grandparents. They're not old farts, as my grandpa's ex-military, ex-judoka, and not one to play with. They immediately drive to my mom's job, but this guy starts harassing my grandparents and won't leave my mom's job. 1 p.m. comes around and my mom calls the police. Dude hauls across the street and hides, leaving his car at my mom's job. Police search for him everywhere, and he's nowhere to be found. The phone calls continue and things escalate. This man decides to vandalize my mom's car. He throws tar all over my mom's car while the car is parked outside my house. The car is destroyed and my parents have to pay lots of money to be able to fix it. At this point, my dad knows of the whole ordeal and is set on killing this guy. We advise him to calm down because my mom is planning on getting a restraining order from him, and she didn't want my dad to ruin her chances or commit a crime. He continues calling and stands outside my mom's job every day. This man starts driving by my house every day and begins to see me as a target. He leaves my mom a threatening voicemail saying he's going to vandalize my car. So at this point, I'm even more terrified. At this point in the story, my mom has had to call the cops on him several times, but the cops say they can't do anything as he hasn't physically attacked her. My mom decides she's finally going to petition for a restraining order. With the police reports and voicemails as proof, they set up a court date and give my mom a temporary restraining order until the court date, so approximately 2 weeks. This guy does not stop calling my mom, so my mom decides to call a detective in charge of the case, and the guy hasn't even been served with the restraining order yet. few days before the court date. He is notified with the court date, though, so he tells my mom he has proof and she won't stop calling him. He starts targeting the rest of us. I wake up Saturday morning, and my car has letters drawn all over the window with nail polish. Luckily, we were able to just scrape it off gently, but by now I'm a nervous wreck. I start doing bad in my classes and I haven't slept for about a month. He then begins to harass my dad with voicemails and phone calls, but luckily my dad didn't buy in any of his BS. The man shows up with his stepson, and his stepson starts talking shit to my mom, because of course he only knows this man's side of the story. The judge calls them in and he does his usual questioning, talks about police reports, etc. The judge asks him if he has anything to say or show. Yes, I have a phone bill that shows she called me more than 200 times in the past month. The judge says, okay, show me. Guess what? He didn't bring it. There's no such thing. The judge nods her head and says, okay. I reached the verdict. He was found guilty, and my mom was awarded a restraining order for life. We finally have peace in our family. So, family stalker, fuck you. Let's not meet again. Edit. Just want to tell people who might be in a similar situation to please go to the police ASAP. The danger and the emotional torture is not worth it. Sometimes they won't go away, like we thought this guy would. We took too long to take action. So before I begin, perhaps a bit of background information would help you understand my story. I'm now a 20-year-old male living in the Netherlands, and I've been a geek my whole life. Games in particular have always played a major role in my life, starting when I got my first PlayStation when I was 5 years old. Something about gaming always got me. Be it mechanically or in terms of storytelling, I could always find something to love about it. As I grew older, I got more into RPGs, and eventually found my way onto World of Warcraft. As I got more involved in the game, I started joining raiding guilds. For those of you who don't know, it's basically a group of players who are intent on facing the game's hardest content as a team. The second guild I joined was the greatest bloody team of people I had thus far. One of these people was a Swedish girl who was around my age called Maggie. We got along quite nicely, and as it turned out, her mom, who was also in the guild, was actually living in the Netherlands. So we'd end up in conversations where she asked me to teach her some Dutch, and I'd teach her, and she'd teach me some Swedish in return. It was all good fun. Fast forward to the beginning of 2013, the aforementioned guild had fallen apart a while back, and I had joined a new one. I had stayed in touch with some people in the old guild, but Maggie hadn't really been online that much. When she did get back online, we quickly caught up. It turned out that she had actually moved in with her mother and had spent the last couple of months improving her Dutch and attending a high school. She also started dating this guy called William, who's actually part of the guild I had met Maggie in. He always struck me as a nice guy. Other guild members always thought he was a bit direct and perhaps rude, but being Dutch, I understood that it's just simply how our culture works, so I was okay with it. June comes around. Me and Maggie recently finished our final exams, and we were waiting for the results to come back in. One afternoon, while we were playing online, I suggested a meetup between the two of us. I really didn't have too much to do, and given that she had voiced her concerns about finding her footing in Dutch social circles, I figured that this would be a nice opportunity to take her first baby steps into the country. She excitedly agreed and asked if she could bring William as well. Obviously I said yes, seeing as he was her boyfriend. Meetups are always safer when you arrive as a couple, and meeting former guild members was something I always looked forward to anyway. A couple of days later, I met them both in Rotterdam and had a great day. I showed them around the city since I knew it best, and had some nice conversations, a few laughs, and we ended the day by taking a trip to Euromast. Before leaving, Maggie had to go to the bathroom, so me and William were waiting outside. Striking conversation, I said to him, "You two make a nice couple." "Thanks," he replied. "I freaking love her, you know. Honestly, wouldn't know what I would do without her at this stage." Back then, I didn't know much of that statement. It's just a thing people say when they're in love, so kudos to him, right? Maggie got out of the restroom, we said our goodbyes, and we parted ways. A few weeks later, we get our exam scores back. I had passed high school with flying colors, but Maggie wasn't so lucky. She had failed most of her exams. She told me she was going to be studying for the rest of the summer in order to properly prepare for her rerun of last year of high school. I told her that if she needed any help, that I was willing to see what I could do, even when I was going to college. She was very thankful and assured me that she'd let me know if she needed any help. Fast forward again to September. After our last conversation, Maggie had pretty much disappeared off the internet. She hadn't logged into World of Warcraft, she was never on Skype, and wasn't even on Facebook anymore. I had asked William in mid-August how she was doing, and he assured me that she was fine, so I thought nothing of it. I even admired her for her focus on education. However, during my second week in college, all of that changed. I got into the metro and picked up a free newspaper in the seat next to me to pass the time. I vividly remember turning to the 4th page and reading a headline. Swedish woman, 19, from city stabbed in her own backyard. It took me a few seconds to realize that she had lived in that city now, and that she was 19. Even though this article didn't mention a name, I grew very concerned. I quickly sent her a text as we exchanged phone numbers when we met up, asking her if she was okay. The rest of the day went by and I heard nothing from Maggie. I eventually figured that if anything had happened to her, people would most likely start posting things on her Facebook page. Concerned and scared of what I was going to find, I started typing her name into the search bar of Facebook. Sure enough, it was already filling up with messages from people who had heard she passed away from her injuries. After inquiring with some other former guild members, it turned out William had stabbed her. She had broken up with him after he got her horrendous test scores back, and he wasn't all too pleased with that. In the aftermath of the incident, me and some other Dutch guild members went to the city to meet up with her friends from school, attend the memorial set up in her school, and put some flowers at the scene of the crime on behalf of everyone she had played the game with. When we met up with Maggie's school friends, we found out that William hadn't been half as nice as we thought he was. During their relationship, he had been very controlling of Maggie, and after the breakup, he began stalking her and sending her threatening text messages. She even went to the police to report it, but they told her they couldn't do anything for her at that stage. After that, she met a different guy and started dating him. William found out and, well, took matters into his own hands. Thinking back at this, the worst part of this all just came to mind. When we put flowers on the scene of the crime, we stood around for a few minutes, contemplating whether or not we should knock on the door and personally give her mother our condolences, given that we knew her as well. We decided against it, given that we might unintentionally remind her mother that Maggie's online connections ultimately cost her her life. As soon as we got back to our car, we saw Maggie's front door open. Out came her mother with Maggie's younger sister. I knew at the time that Maggie had a younger sister, but I didn't know that she was only 6 or 7. I fucking lost it when I saw her little head hanging down while grabbing hold of her mother, scared to go around her corner to face all the drawings of flowers people left there. In writing this post, I found a very recent article that said William is most likely going to prison for 20 years. Honestly, William, I fucking hope you never make it out of there. Edit 1. I'm not sure if the community guidelines allow me to link to the article. Any thoughts on whether or not I could link the article as proof for my story? Edit 2. Another user found an English article that didn't include Maggie's last name. After finding out that I could post the article I found, I became kind of hesitant, given that her full name might lead to people going looking for friends and relatives. This one I'm more comfortable with sharing. The fact that it's also in English is just a nice bonus. This didn't happen to me. However, I did witness this incident, and it creeps me out to this day. Back in junior high school, there's this popular kid named Ryan that used to bully me and tons of other people in our school. Ryan was the type of kid that thought he was the best in the world because he was the captain of the football team, the kid that bullied nerds and cheated on his girlfriends. You know the type. Ryan's father ran an automotive parts store. His specialty was paint jobs and window tinting. He had many vehicles, but his favorite was a dark blue truck with orange and yellow flames on the front. It also had tinted windows and spinning hubcaps on the wheels. Ryan's father often wore the same team jersey as his son's team jersey, a red and white hat and blue jeans. As you continue reading, you'll discover why the details of this particular truck, as well as its owner, are very important. One day, on my way to my class, I fell down the stairs and sprained my ankle. I ended up limping to the nurse's office and calling my dad to come pick me up. After that, I sat in the waiting area looking out for my dad's car. About 5 minutes after I left the nurse's office, Ryan walked into the waiting area and sat down. Bored out of his mind, Ryan decided to talk to me. While we were waiting for our dads to pick us up, I guess he felt safe talking to nerds since his friends weren't around, so I begrudgingly decided to be polite with him and made small talk. About 5 minutes or so later, Ryan looked out the door and saw his father's truck pull up to the entrance of the school. Ryan said, "See you later, man," picked up his backpack and headed towards the glass door. He's about to push the door open when he suddenly stopped and paused. When I asked what was wrong, Ryan explained to me that his father usually picked him up later, and that he was usually parking his truck next to the glass doors. Instead, Ryan's dad was 20 minutes early. The truck was next to the flagpoles, which were much further away, and the hubcaps appeared to be different and didn't even spin. After a few minutes of this, Ryan's cell phone went off. Ryan at this point simply assumed that it was his dad calling him and didn't pick it up, so he walked out the door and headed towards the truck. I decided to take a nap while I was waiting for my own dad to pick me up. Suddenly, I heard what sounded like an older man yelling and Ryan screaming. I looked out the window only to see Ryan flaring his arms at the older man trying to pull him into the truck. Because of my ankle, I couldn't run to Ryan's aid, so I shouted to the nurse as well as some other staff members to get help. One of the nurses immediately called the police. A couple of secretaries ran towards the truck to help Ryan. Upon seeing the secretaries running towards him, the creep shoved Ryan away, climbed further into his truck. The guy sped off and disappeared into the intersection that led into a nearby highway. Ryan at this point was crying in pain, mainly because the guy had pepper sprayed him. The secretaries helped pull Ryan to his feet and guided him to the nurse's office. About a few minutes later, the police along with Ryan's real father arrived. The police as well as the ambulance tended to Ryan, while a couple of police officers interviewed me and the other witnesses. Because I was the only student that had witnessed this, the police as well as Ryan's dad asked me to stay in touch and hang out with Ryan just so that he could have a shoulder to lean on and recover emotionally. So I swallowed my pride and gave Ryan my phone number. From that day forward, Ryan was a completely different person. The same person who used to body slam me into lockers was now in constant fear and used me as a shield instead of a punching bag. There wasn't a day at school where Ryan wasn't around me. He was especially clingy and paranoid when it came to having his dad pick him up. I would have to hold his hand and stay there until his dad came around. It even got to the point that Ryan would call me every night to vent his fear as well as update me on what the police would find, and many of the details about this were very, very creepy. For instance, the creep, whoever he was, not only knew where Ryan went to school and where he got picked up, he also even knew which vehicle Ryan's dad drove whenever he picked up his son from school. So he decided to imitate everything about Ryan's father. That's right, the creep actually went through the trouble of painting his own truck the same colors as his father just to fool and lure Ryan. He even dressed like Ryan's dad. Ryan even said to me that the disguise was so convincing that it wasn't even until he looked the creep in the eye that he realized he wasn't his father. Yet things get even creepier the more Ryan told me and the more the police department found. As it turns out, the creep also knew Ryan's cell phone number, but wasn't the one who called Ryan. Ryan told me that the police said that the mysterious number belonged to a payphone at a nearby gas station, so the creep in the truck couldn't have possibly called Ryan, meaning that not one, but two people may be involved with this. Despite having video surveillance, a license plate, and a description of the driver, the police never found the guy, or his gas station buddy. Even when the creep continued to terrorize Ryan and his dad, after about 3 months after the truck incident, Ryan called me in the middle of the night, this time in hysterics. Someone had thrown several Molotov cocktails at Ryan's house. A couple of them even hit and shattered a window, and set part of his house on fire. About a month after the Molotov cocktails were thrown, someone, most likely the creep, set fire to Ryan's father's business. Ryan and his father moved out not long after. The creep also disappeared, leaving everyone else to wonder who this creep was. Was the creep a disgruntled parent or a relative of a student that Ryan bullied? Was he the enraged parent or relative of one of Ryan's many ex-girlfriends? Was he a parent of a rival team member? Was he a dissatisfied customer of Ryan's father? Or was he just a random creep that liked to terrorize teenage boys? The possibility as to who this guy was and why, as well as his accomplice would target Ryan, were endless. With Ryan now gone, I quickly found myself getting very frightened over the possibility of the same creep going after me. For a long time, I was super paranoid about the creep going after me, and subjecting me to even worse terror than Ryan had experienced. From that day forward, I refused to be picked up from school, no matter how sick or hurt I was, all because I feared that some guy was going to do the same to me. Even to this day, the whole incident sends shivers down my spine. At this time, I was 10 years old and lived in a small coastal town in Newfoundland that was littered with large forests. Almost every house had acres of forestry behind it, which in itself was very beautiful. As I now am 21 and live in a bustling city in Alberta, I do find myself missing the setting in my old backyard every once in a while. but it's usually accompanied by the unsettling memory of what I'm about to recount. By the time I was in grade 4, I had already been trusted to be home by myself as my mother went out to visit my grandmother and aunt, who lived a few minutes down the road from us. I was happy to have such a privilege. I was an only child, and my father worked in another province months at a time, so I was very lucky to have this opportunity. It usually meant late movies and video games, and on the odd night, exploring the forest. This night, I was exploring said woods. I actually never went too far in, usually up to a large rock formation. I like to climb and look through the trees in all directions. The house was always in sight, so I never felt scared or frightened by being there. It felt like having my own private place that I could enjoy. So as I was scaling the rocks to sit in my usual spot, I suddenly started hearing a sound from further in. A sound that wasn't natural at all. Crying. Faint crying. It sounded like a child, maybe even an infant, crying relentlessly. I was more puzzled than scared, since crying was the last thing I would expect to hear in the forest. I must have listened for a good few minutes, convinced my ears were playing tricks on me. But in fact, it was crying. In my mind, I imagined it was a young girl that somehow wandered too far into the forest and needed help. I considered going back to my house and calling my mother to help, but then I worried that the girl would wander further in beyond earshot. I decided to locate the sound myself. I made my way hastily through the trees and branches, trying to figure out the exact direction of the crying. It definitely wasn't easy, as I thought, and it was a matter of trial and error and make sure I was going in the right direction. One thing I never realized as I was doing all of this was how consistent the crying was. No pausing, no words, or of any kind. Just non-stop sobbing and wailing that had no end. What I did notice was that the closer I got to the sound, the more metallic it sounded to me. I eventually reached a small clearing that only had a few small trees and bushes and nothing else. I had never gone this far in before, so it was the first time I'd ever seen it. When I made my way in, it didn't take me too long to find the source of the sound. A gray tape recorder, one of the biggest I'd ever seen, was peeking out of one of the bushes, and the crying was coming out of the speakers. This really disturbed me, as I went all the way expecting to find a real person. But it was only a tape recorder. As I was about to shut it off, I heard another sound coming just outside the clearing on the opposite side. It sounded like steady footsteps advancing in my direction. It only took me seeing a tall, shadowy figure coming my way to send me running. Fortunately, by some miracle, I recognized my way back by identifying rocks and trees I identified as landmarks. Looking back, this probably saved my life. I never looked back, and I didn't try listening to see if that person was following me. I just kept telling myself to make it home and nothing else. I had to get home. Once I saw the large rock formation, it didn't take me long to know the rest of the way without needing to survey my surroundings. I was out of the forest in record time and immediately ran to my house, locking the doors and shutting all the lights off as I went to my bedroom. I didn't want this person to know where I lived, or I would be really done for. After shutting the curtains of my window, I peeked out through them discreetly as I could see if whoever had been out there actually managed to keep up with me. I didn't see anyone, but I stayed by that window for a good hour, waiting for something to emerge out of the forest shadows, but nothing ever did. After that, I went straight to bed. I never told my mother about what happened that night, and I was never able to go back into that forest again.